That's interesting.
So for those of you that have just joined us, I have kept the talk feature turned off because there's over 200 people registered to show up, and they're coming in fast and furious as we speak. There is a Q&A area either on the bottom of your screen if you are on a computer, or on the top of your screen if you're on a tablet, and that's the best place to ask questions. And I will answer all the questions either as we go or make sure I get them answered at the end. If you want to chat, you can put messages in the chat area. That's not a good place for a question because it will get lost and I'll have to scroll back and forth trying to find it. But I will be addressing all the questions that come up in the Q&A. It's just a minute after 7. We're going to give a couple more minutes and then we'll start.
Interesting.
What's
Can
that?
Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Oh, all right. A light just went off on my mic. I don't know what that means.
Means the light went off on your mic.
Yeah, I got this real expensive mic, so I think it would work, but
Is that a dirty sock over it?
it's actually been washed. Yeah, they wanted $45 for a dirty sock to put over it, so I said, I just use my own. Oh, there's a nice, Bruce Hogel's got a thing in the chat telling how to activate.
Yeah, it's under accessibility, but I don't see where accessibility is. And it's different in webinars than it is in a meeting. So the accessibility feature might be something that's open in the meeting, but not in the webinar, because I see nowhere on here.
You have a bar at the bottom of the keyboard icon that turns it on.
Oh. The green shield is what Tom Klein's telling me. Aha. I see the green shield. Thank you, Tom. Okay.
Did that work?
I don't know. I'm still trying to find it. There we go. Subtitles will look like this. And how do we turn it on? Closed captioning. Well, I can see where it tells me what it looks like, but it doesn't say how to turn it on. Maybe it's under general. Nope. There's nowhere where it says click on. It tells me what the subtitles will look like, but it does not, there's nowhere that says click here to turn on.
Interesting.
So, yep. Yeah, well, it doesn't look like we can do it. So, All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. We're at 5 after. There's plenty of people here, so go ahead, Jim.
Well, I'd like to welcome everybody. Since we can't have a physical meeting this year, I pulled my hair out a little bit because we're going to have John be our speaker this year. And it just, number one, if we had it, nobody would show up or very few. And the city is kind of forbidding it from happening because it's indoors for a whole day. So we thought we'd try something like this. And John and I put our heads together. In fact, we were together in Arizona. When was that? January or February?
Would have been,
Sure.
was it March? No, it would have been before, would have been either early January. Must have been early January. Yeah.
Anyway, we got together and talked about doing, what he was going to talk about at our meeting. So I said, why don't we just do a Zoom presentation on part of that? We'll do it in like 3 different presentations. We'll just let you do what you're going to do at the Great Plains Nature Photographers meeting online. And John said, great idea. So we're going to get that rolling. The other guy I'd like to introduce here today is Alan Samlin. Alan is with Hunt's Photo. And only thing I know is Boston. So I know it's in the Boston area, but Alan's been a great guy to work with. And in fact, I haven't bought anything from anybody but Hunt's in probably 7 or 8 years. So I'll just say this. I know there's a lot of people who are hooked on certain other suppliers. When you live in McPherson, Kansas, in the middle of nowhere, we have no camera store that I can get to without driving for three hours or 2 hours. So it's really nice to pick up a phone, call Alan, and tell him what I want. And if you're ever in a motel somewhere and you drop your lens and break it, you can call Alan. He knows who you are. He knows your voice. If you deal with him, he'll overnight it to you wherever you are, to a hotel. Try that with other suppliers. They'll never send anything out to you to a hotel. So it's really nice to have a one-on-one relationship with somebody who really knows their stuff. And Alan's been in this. He started in photography just about the same time I did when the dinosaurs died, and we've been in there ever since. So, Alan, if you want to see a few things, and we'll get rolling.
Yeah, I can tell you, Hunt's. I'm glad to be with them. Hunt's has been is a 3rd-generation family business. We have 8 locations throughout New England. And a large educational division today. Personally, I was a competitor of Hunt's for 30 years with 4 stores of my own, and was good friends with the father of the fellows that own the company now. I'm now celebrating my 45th year in the photo retail business. Actually, my dad was in the photo retail business too, so it's a lifetime commitment. And I'm just glad to be here. We've got lots of specials to offer everybody. And as we go through the presentation, John will be showing slides and I'll comment on them. And then tomorrow, John's going to send an email out to everybody with the specials on them. So, I'm delighted to be here. I see a lot of familiar names. I wish I could see everybody's face, but there's a lot of names here, a lot of folks who I know I've worked with before. So thanks for coming, everybody.
John, you're on front and center.
All right. Thanks, Jim. Thank you, Alan. I appreciate both you guys and your support and your sponsorship for this program. And we're going to keep Alan on for just a few minutes here. I'm going to go through the first part of this presentation and talk about equipment. And Alan has some specials that coincide with it. So one of the things that, as photographers, we're always interested in, what are you using? What are you using to get that shot? So I'm going to show you and tell you about it if you don't know already. So I'm going to go ahead and start the screen share. And then Jim, if you want to turn your video off, it might slow band or open up more bandwidth too.
Yep, it's off.
All right. Bear with me while I get this share screen going. Where are you? Huh. All right, you guys see a screen? Do you see a slide? Fine art of black and white? All right, good. So we'll get started. So this is the fine art of black and white in landscape photography. And I have to say that in particular, I'm not really going into my travel, well, street work, street photography, what I would consider more street photography, or necessarily travel photography. It's more related to landscape, although those two genres do overlap to a certain degree. Am I not going to be able to? There we go. I guess I can advance that way. So, and you see the Fuji cameras there, Alan? Are we seeing Fuji cameras?
We are definitely seeing Fuji cameras.
All right, good. That means it's working. So that's good. That's a good thing. So I shoot with Fuji cameras. I shoot, I have the XT3 system and Fujinon lenses, and I started shooting with Fuji about 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago. And what sold me on their system was the quality of the lenses. They're APS-C size sensor, but I will put them up against a full frame any day of the week, and it's because of the quality of the optics. It has everything to do with the quality of the glass that's in front of the camera. And Alan, you've got a special on this, right?
We do. We have a limited quantity of Fuji XT3 kits. That's with the 1855 f2.8 to f4 lens. And they're priced out at $1,259, which is a substantial savings over what they normally are. For any of you who are already vested in the Fuji system, I'm also offering 10% off Fuji lenses. All these specials, by the way, are good for the next week, so they'll expire on next Tuesday, the 18th. So we'll let them run through next Tuesday, so everybody will have a chance to call in.
I tossed these two cameras in there. This gets into the crossover a little bit. I like to shoot with the X100F and X70 when I'm traveling. And also I pull them out more for street photography, but there are some images that are in the presentation that were shot with these cameras. And I love them. They're great. The optics are fantastic. The quality is superb. So I don't believe Alan's has any specific specials regarding these. They have the X100Vs that are out now instead of the F, and the X70 is no longer sold. The other oddball, yep. I'm sorry, go ahead, Alan.
John, we will offer 10% off on the current X100V if anybody's interested.
Great. It's a heck of a camera. This beast I pull out every once in a while. It's an Actus. It's like a view camera, only designed to put a digital back on it. And I wanted a full frame on it, primarily for the optics and the field of view. So I got a Sony A7R II, and I use a host of different lenses from my view camera days. And you know, I like to play when I'm in the mood to play around with a camera for a lot of before I take the photograph. That's when I pull this out, because it takes quite a bit to set this guy up and go through all the motions, but it's a lot of fun to use. As many of you know, I use the Benro filter system, and a lot of the photographs that you're going to see tonight have been filtered, and I'll talk a little bit about that when I show you the images and we go over it. But the Benro system, as far as I'm concerned, hands down is the best system out there, and I think Alan's got a special on this. Is that correct?
That is correct. We're offering 20% off on all of the Benro filters, plus special pricing on the starter kits. And again, you'll have my contact information later, and I'll be able to send you quotes if you're interested in specific pieces or recommendations.
Finally, I'm not going to get extensively into printing, but I will talk a little bit about it. In particular, there's some unique things that I do with printing with black and white that I will discuss. Jim and I have already been talking about a second session for this, which will deal more with printing, and that one will be about the fine art print, and that's the next segment or session for this series of presentations that I'm doing. We don't have a date nailed down yet, but we should soon. And then I'll go into more depth in my print process for that. But tonight I'm going to talk a little bit about it. I use Moab paper and a Canon Pro 1000 printer, and I think this is the last equipment slide. And I think, Alan, you have a special running on this too. Is that correct?
That is correct. We're offering 10% off on all Moab paper. And again, you'll be able to contact me for a quote on that. On the Pixma Pro 1000 printer, we are offering two things. We're offering with the printer a free package of 17 by 22, 25 sheet Canon semi-gloss paper, which is a $100 value. By getting that paper for free when you buy the printer, it entitles you to get a $200 mail-in rebate off the printer. And I'll spell out the specific prices on the on the email that John's going to send out.
It's a great printer. That thing is built. It's built like a tank. It's very, very nice. Thanks, Alan. You can go ahead and turn your video off now if you'd like.
Bye-bye.
Yep. Bye-bye. Thanks. So the fine art of black and white. I'm going to talk about to start with. I'm going to talk about visualization of images, and that includes the why, when, and where, and how. So I'll talk about why I do black and white, when and where sort of overlap, when I find the best time to shoot black and white, and then I will talk about how I approach black and white images and how I go through the physical process of capturing them. So I'm starting out with just a portfolio of work from a couple different areas, and in particular, I have a lot of stuff from the Southwest. I think if there is one environment that just cries for black and white work, it is the Southwest, the American Southwest. It is an iconic landscape and has been worked by many, many photographers before me. But I just love that landscape, and I love the way it looks in black and white. This is my homage to Ansel Adams. It is the White House ruins in Canyon de Chelly. And I studied Ansel Adams when I was in college. He was still alive when I started my schooling in college, and I loved his work, and I loved what he did with photography, his approach, which was, at the time when he started working the way he did, was a unique and different way of working, and he developed an entire system of seeing called the zone system. I studied his work very closely. I read all of his books, and I read and reread them because they were very technical, and I followed them as closely as I could. I did not at that time work with a view camera much. I couldn't afford one. I worked with mostly roll film cameras, but I adapted his methods to my way of working with a roll film camera. And then later, as I worked with a view camera, to a certain degree, adapted it to the view camera. And with digital photography, of course, it's very, very different. And Ansel, at the end of his life, was quoted as saying that the digital revolution was just starting. They were just developing a way to make images digitally, and he knew that it was going to profoundly change the method that images were going to be captured. And if he was alive today, he would fully embrace the digital revolution, I'm sure of it, because he was very much into new technologies. I use his system still. I still think in terms of the way that I did at the very start when I was studying him and working with film. So he's been a very big influence on me. As I mentioned, I filter a lot. I'll talk more about filters and how I use them. This one was filtered. It was filtered to bring out the darkness of the clouds more. By the way, the shadow at the very top of the peak is not necessarily due to a graduated neutral density filter, although that did affect it certainly, but there was a shadow there naturally with the light. The light was playing across this is Shiprock in New Mexico, and the light was playing across it just in this way. I was on the reservation where I had a guide, a Navajo guide, that brought me to this location so I could photograph here. And Valley of the Gods. I've got 3 images in here which are night sky shots, and all 3 of them are panoramas, and all 3 of them are black and whites. I don't know exactly why, but when I do night skies, I do a lot of night skies that I do in color, but when I shoot panoramas, almost all my panoramas are converted to black and white. And if you say, well, why is that, John? I don't know. I just like the way they look. There's something about the black and white and the panorama format that fits, and they work. And so beyond that, I guess I don't ask why anymore. It just, if it works, great. And so that is not necessarily how I envisioned them to begin with. And I will talk a little bit more about that in just a little bit. I usually am very careful about how I envision the work that I'm going to shoot and what it's going to look like at the end. And in all of these cases, I did not envision a black and white until after the fact, when I looked at it and converted and said, yes, this is the way to go with this. And so I am shooting a lot of black and white panorama Milky Way shots these days, and they've been working, and as long as they continue to work, great. I threw in a couple photographs from North Dakota. I go up there every summer. I do a workshop up there. We call it the 49th parallel, which is the border between Canada and the United States, and we are within spitting distance of that border. We're right up there by Canada. It's an amazing place. I work with Tim Zeltinger, and he knows all these wonderful places to go. He's always discovering new ones and bringing me to them, going, what do you think of this one, John? And so we find some really fantastic spots. Looking forward to it again this year. And we get some great, awesome skies, especially when the storms go through. And every time I think I've been up there, we've had at least one good storm move through. So for most people, when they are shooting and they're shooting digital, the first thing they see in the image, they see it as a color image. They don't necessarily see it as black and white because they're shooting raw. If you're not shooting raw, you want to be shooting raw, and it's a must for serious black and white landscape work, which means that you're going to see the image in color, not black and white. And it's going to give you a lot more latitude to play around with if you're shooting in color or the raw capture versus a JPEG black and white. But when I look at the scene, and when I'm out photographing and I'm looking at the scene, I am trying to think about the image as a black and white, if that's what I want to do with it. And I get fooled, certainly. Sometimes I look at a particular setting or scene and I think, oh, this is a great color shot, and I shoot it, and then later on I discover that it's a good black and white. Or I might be shooting, vice versa, I might be shooting in what I think is going to be a black and white image, but as I work it, I see that the color is an integral part of the image. And so I have to change and switch my thinking. But for the most part, I try to envision what I think the final image is going to be like before I take the photograph, because it does affect subtly how I handle certain things. So I've thrown in a couple examples here for you to take a look at, and so hopefully it'll shed some light on that, because it's one of the trickiest aspects of this, because you're seeing everything in color. This shot is a color photograph. It was seen in color, it was shot, and immediately when I shot it, I realized this is a great color shot. Why would I want to take that color out of there? the color carries this photograph. It's also really, it has a very atmospheric and soft look to it, which fits it. At the same time, and you can come across these situations where the situation will work both for color as well as black and white. On that same evening, I'm photographing and I'm definitely thinking in terms of black and white. Now you'll notice that this is processed differently than what the color is. There's wonderful texture and there's wonderful line and motion and movement with this, but there's not the same atmospherics. It's not soft. It's very, very crisp and very sharp, where the color has this sort of soft atmospheric look to it. The black and white is very crisp and clean for the tonalities. Here's an image that was shot, and I knew at the time that I was photographing it, I looked at the scene and I said, there's no way this is going to work in color. Why? Because this is what I was looking at. It was extremely hazy, very monochromatic, and just as far as I was concerned, as a color image, didn't carry it and wasn't going to carry it. But a conversion to black and white adds a wonderful sense of layering, adds a very crisp and succinct definition between the tonalities as you work back through the layer upon layer of the mountains. This is the Espanza del Diablo, which is the backbone of the devil in Durango State, Mexico. This is a scene in Michigan, and when I saw it and photographed it again, I was thinking in terms of black and white. And look at what happens with this one. This one, as we change to black and white, it really tells a story, I think, much, much better. It creates a sense of depth where this seems to be flat. When you change it to black and white, that road becomes much more prominent. It just draws your eye right back into the image, and it's a natural for a black and white conversion. This one fooled me. When I was shooting this stuff, it was extremely rugged, very, very tough situation, very monochromatic, and I thought that black and white would be the way to go with this shot. And I looked at it. In fact, I worked it up black and white, but I looked at the color, and the color is the one that makes it for me. It's a subtle color, but it's that blue. It adds to the cool and coldness of the situation, and I think is the better rendition between the two. I think with every image, there is a better way to present it. It may not reveal itself right away to you. You may struggle with it for a while, but one of the two is better. And you're going to discover what it is. And it might come down to your own personal preference. I think that the image tells you ultimately what it needs to be. Whether it needs to be black and white or color, it will communicate that to you as you work with it. And certainly, like I say, I've been fooled, and I have to change my mind with them, and sometimes that's right away, and sometimes it's after I live with them for a little while before that reveals itself to me. But I'm strongly believe that one of the two is going to be better, and so I don't like to show both. And when I go out and I present my work, I want to show a finished work that I'm confident is the best that image can be, that I have worked it and considered it and looked at it from every possible way, and I am presenting to you, the viewer, the very best possible rendition that image can be processed as. So I like to think I do that all before I show it, but there are times, certainly, if I'm posting quickly after I shoot, there are certainly times that I've been fooled, but I try to be considerate and careful as I work the life of that image. So that's a little bit about the background on color versus black and white. That's a constant theme that will run through, I mean, it could run through any one of these images that I'm going to show you here tonight. But it is the first one that you will be up against, and it's how you approach it and what you ask yourself. And I'll talk more about how I handle the exposure and stuff like that for black and white a little bit later, which tends to be just a little bit different than with color. one of the things that that attracts me to a scene in black and white are skies. And when I see good moody skies, they tend to mute color, so there's not as much color. It becomes more monochromatic. Stormy situations tend to be more monochromatic, and I think hence look better in black and white if they're properly processed. So skies are a big part of it. And when I'm shooting these skies and I am processing for these skies, I like to start with an image that has the basis of what I want in a finished image, that I'm working towards that. It's an incremental step all along the way from what I visualize the scene to look like, how I treat it as far as how I expose it, which means what I'm doing as far as filtering and how I'm filtering it, if I'm using a polarizer or if I'm using my graduated neutral density filters. And I use a lot of graduated neutral density filters, and how many graduated neutral density filters, or how dense, how intense I'm adding the density of them has to do with the particular scene and whether or not I'm going black and white or color. I tend to filter the skies heavier if I'm going black and white. I'm trying to darken them down a lot more. And I'm trying to bring out more mood or drama with those skies in a black and white sky. So I want to get them darker. This technique is nothing new. It has been around for a long, long, long time. And it dates back to the very first photographers. When the very first photographers started working, they were working with a view camera, somewhat like that one that I showed you, although not digital film. It had a lens on the front, it had a bellows, and it had a back where you put the film. And the lens that hung on the front had a movement that you could move the lens up or down. You could do what's called a lens shift. And as you shifted the lens higher, you picked up more of the sky. Well, when that lens was projecting the light onto the light sensitive film on the back of the camera, you got to the edge of the lens's coverage, which meant that there was fall off. And that fall off was an intensity of light that was striking the film. Not as much light striking the film meant that the film went darker there. Same principle holds true with the digital and that view camera that I use with the digital, where if you shift the lens far enough, you have less light, it gets darker. If you don't have a shiftable lens, which I don't with a lot of these images, this particular one was shot with that tilt shift, but on a lot of these others where I don't have the shift capability, like this one, I have to add that or sort of fake it in and darken those skies, and I do that with the graduated neutral densities. That Benro system is fantastic for it. And frequently with the black and white work, Benro makes a 5-stop and a 4-stop graduated neutral density. And there are times when I'm stacking both of those. So I'm doing 9 stops. I've even added 3, and I've added another 3-stop on there. So I've got a 5, 4, and 3. So I'm going 12 stops to darken. Now, not all of that is hitting because I feather them in at the top. So I'm not into the darkest part of the filter, but the lighter part, and I'm getting as much as I can out of it. But there are times when I will filter that heavily to try to get that dark, dark look at the skies. If you go out and look at Ansel Adams' work, Clyde Butcher, those are 2 of the most fantastic landscape photographers that I know that work in North America or did work in North America. And you will see that technique of dark skies consistently throughout their work. Wonderful clouds, looks like cauliflower. Just this one screamed black and white at me the second I saw that sky, and I just went, yep, there's a really nice black and white. So I used a pretty heavy filter. Typically I'll put 2 in, so I'll put 1 in that comes down into the image, down closer to the horizon, and then I'll feather another one off more towards the top to darken the top area a little bit darker than the rest of the sky. What I do here, now normally if you have a graduated neutral density, it'll be all the way across this image and it will be darkening whatever is in the foreground sticking up, in this case, the lighthouse. And what I do with that in post-process is I use the shadow slider, or I'll do a dodge to dodge back and reduce the effect of that graduated neutral density. And as you can see, you can pull it off and it doesn't really harm the image at all. Another thing that I look for is quality of light. Light makes or breaks a photograph. There's a lot of really good photographs that are carried by other things besides light. But if it's going to be a truly great photograph, there's damn few that don't have really striking light in them. Light is one of those things that it separates the image from being a good or pretty good image to being a fantastic image. And so whenever I see light that is really, really striking or atmospheric, I'm thinking in terms of black and white. This one I happen to shoot, it was right here in my own backyard. And it was shot after all that white stuff that you see on the ground. It was actually shot about this time of the year, and that's hail. We had literally tennis ball size hail. It was huge, and we had a lot of it. It was piles of it. So that's right after a severe hailstorm, and the atmosphere was just amazing. Iceland, wonderful striking light and the shapes and forms. Here's quite the opposite. It's not dark, moody light, but very, very light. This was a very high key image, tons of sunlight pouring right at the camera. Saw this little monument sitting on the side of the road. Again, this was at the entrance to the Backbone of the Devil, a very exciting drive, needless to say, and one of the many little monuments or little features that were along the roadside that we saw in Mexico. This was a night shot, and this one was handheld at like 1/5 of a second with that little X70 camera. And I've blown this up to 16 by 24, and it looks amazing. It's sharp as all get out, and it works. Very theatrical. So this starts to get into street photography. I tried to keep the street photos out of this, folks, but a couple of them snuck in, what can I say? Here's another one. I just posted this one today on Facebook, and this was photographed from a patio where we had dinner. And again, I shot this with my little X70 pocket camera that I had with me when we went out to eat. And I saw this scene it was a natural scene for this, in that as the twilight settled on this town and the street lights became more intense and more prominent as part of the scene, I saw this leading line that was established by the lit main street that went up the hill to the shining beacon of the cathedral on the top of the hill. And I thought this was a perfect metaphor for so much of Mexico, and especially the areas where we traveled in the highlands in the north central part, where just about every one of these towns was rebuilt by the Spaniards in the early to mid 1500s, and these beautiful cathedrals that were built on the hill as a shining example of the civilization that the Spaniards brought to Mexico. And I say that in quotations a little bit, but roads are always great, and light on roads, something about, especially if they've got, in this case where it had rained, there was a little sheen on it, so you've got this glistening light coming off the road, works as a great leading line in the layers that lead you back into the scene. And photographed in color, this was very monochromatic. It was a natural to turn it to black and white. Same with this shot. I saw this shot and immediately recognized that it would make a great black and white. This was shot just down the road along the shore, almost between me and two harbors, just a few miles away on a nice foggy morning. And a waterfall that just, that white sort of provides the line that brings you into the image and brings you back into the receding part of the image. So content is another area that's going to really drive whether or not you're thinking, or I think, in terms of black and white, and whether or not I want to convert to black and white. In this case, this is an old ore dock on Lake Superior. And, you know, as photographers, we love photographing old stuff. We look for it all the time. And old stuff in black and white, it just kind of goes together, peas in a pod. So, yeah, if I'm looking at older stuff, I'm usually thinking in terms of black and white. So this reminds me of, oh, I forget the name of the artist, but he did all those stairwells and arches and everything. So old stuff, more of the pyramids from Mexico. If you ask me what is the greatest landscape photograph I've ever done, I would put this up in the top 5 most of the time. And I might be surprising some of you by saying that, because it's a subtle image, but I'm captivated by this image. And I love the qualities of this image. This is one where the light isn't necessarily really striking, but it's good enough. It's the content that carries this. The posture that as I captured this little boy getting ready to kick the ball at his sister and the dog right in here, that's what carries this shot for me. It is the village right outside of the Mariposa preserves, which are the butterfly preserves where the marigolds are up in the mountain, not the marigolds, the monarch butterflies are up in the mountains in Mexico. A very magical place. And this image captures that feeling of that magical place for me. So it's one that I like and am just fascinated by. And so that's why I rank this as one of the best landscape photographs I've ever done. And it was done with a pocket camera. I was on the roof of our hotel, and it was happy hour, and we were meeting some of the other guests at the hotel. And I just happened to walk over to the edge and look down, and there was this scene playing out, and I took a few pictures, and this was one of them. Here again, it's content. It's that light little dusting of snow and ice on the textured rock. In this case, the content is the texture. It really, really makes the black and white. Again, you can see that it's sort of a stormy morning, not a lot of color. It's going to be pretty monochromatic scene. And so a conversion to black and white makes a lot of sense because I'm not losing anything. There's nothing, no information there that I'm losing that's critical to this shot, because it's all about the texture, the line, and the form of the rock and the depth in it. And that is carried perfectly well by black and white. Same with this image. You'll see that there's a lot of consistency in landscape with that if you're not losing critical information by taking the color away, many times you're enhancing the overall look or feel of the image by getting rid of the color, which can be a distraction. And finally, this one, which has such wonderful, wonderful texture. I see I have several questions. I'm going to just scan those real quick and see. All right. Oh yeah, so a few people brought up MC Escher as the artist for the stairs. Thank you for providing that. So I'm just getting through these questions, cleaning up some of this stuff, and then I'll move on. If you have other questions, feel free to ask them. I'll either answer them as I go or at the end. So Lisa's asking, do I take black and white photos at the same time of the day as I do my color, or do I shoot differently during the day? depending on whether I'm shooting color or black and white. I find that a lot of my black and white shots are shot, it could be later than what color is. Color is best, you know, for here along the shore of Lake Superior. It's best early in the morning, even before the sun rises. So it could be a half hour, 45 minutes before the sun rises. You're going to have your best color for a sunrise here on Lake Superior. Black and white, I find that tends to shift a little bit later when the color starts to fade. But if you have a really nice day with good light, that light can hang around a little longer. It tends to get a little bit more intense, which helps in the black and white conversion. I would say one of the challenges with black and white and making good black and white images is that a lot of times you really have to max out contrast. And there are times when I'll max it out multiple times, both in the post process as well as once I get it into Photoshop, I will then start adding more contrast in there as well to get the blacks as black as what I want them. So I will shift and adjust my shooting a little bit later in the day. And sometimes you can even shoot more towards the middle of the day and have better desirable results with black and white than you do with color. That's not completely true. There are certainly many times in the middle of the day when you can get wonderful color photographs, but many times that strength of that light being stronger, deeper shadows tends to lend itself a little bit better to black and white photography. I'm going to talk about a little bit about seeing in shades of gray. And so I have my photograph, my test subject here, which are the Abajo Mountains with a storm passing overhead. And so we have this wonderful dark sky, which I really accentuated. I loaded up the filters on this one because I knew I wanted to get that sky nice and deep and dark to match the darkness of the foreground, which is this sagebrush in the foreground, because your eye tends to go to the lightest thing in a scene, and this one had a ready-made subject sort of right in the middle that draws your eye in, which are the snow-capped mountains and the lighter sky in the middle of the photograph. So by maintaining that foreground, which is dark because it's in shade, the light was further back on the mountains, and then that storm cloud that was moving in to darken it down, it sort of balanced the darkness in the foreground and in the sky, leaving this middle portion lighter so it gives more depth and your eye is really drawn in. But let's just run through a little bit on this image. So here's the histogram of the image after it's been processed. And if you look at this area over here, you'll see that these tones that are there match to these darker tones. That is the area of the histogram that we are talking about. This will make more sense as I go through this, why I want to delineate where these tones are and where they fall in relationship to your histogram. So just bear with me as I run through this a little bit, and it will become more important to you as we look at this. So now we are looking at what I would call, the first ones were the shadow areas. These are the mid-tone shadow areas where they're a little bit lighter, more gray, not as deep black. And that is the region of the histogram, the mid-tone shadow areas. Then we go to the mid-tone areas where the values are midway between a black and a pure white. So in Ansel Adams' system, this would be a zone 5. So you're looking at zone 5, zone 6, if you want to think of it in terms of the zone system. And that is the mid-tone area of the histogram, which is that highlighted area of the histogram. Then we move into what I call the mid-tone highlight region, which are the little bit brighter area, zones 6 and 7, maybe even up into 8, but you really get into 8 and 9 or 10 in the highlight areas that are illustrated here. So why is this important? It's important because of the way that digital sees light And as we post-process this image, and if you want to go out to print, which is what I am geared for, it is why I'm hardwired to want to go out to print. It is a lot of what I do. And because I want to go out to print, these things become very important because of the way that the print process works. So I use a system that is called expose to the right. So I am basically using a very old system that has been around for years and years, and Ansel talked about this in his books, where you expose for the shadows and you process for the highlights. He used to do the same thing with film. He would expose for the shadows, intentionally overexpose the film, but then underdevelop it. And then you're doing the same thing in digital, only you're overexposing the digital image, and then you're processing it back down in so that the values fall where you want them to. You have to work in RAW for this to work. It will not work in JPEG because JPEG doesn't handle it the same way. So you have to work in RAW. And it's the difference between 8-bit and 16-bit. So here we have our histogram for that image, same histogram that you saw just moments earlier. If we look at it and we talk about tonal values, the histogram does not represent tonal values. It only represents how many pixels are in a particular area of where the tonal values are. And so this is the highlight area, the pink highlighted area here, which has 128 tonal values. When you print, when you go out to print, the printer is capable of reproducing 256 values. That's it. Your camera captures, it actually captures in 14-bit color. It captures, and it can capture 16,856, I think, or something like that. But a considerable more number of tonal values. But when you go out to print, the print is only capable of reproducing 256. So half of them fall in the highlight area. Half of that, or 64 tonal values, falls within the midtone highlight area. Half of that, or 32 tonal values, falls within the midtones. Half of that, or 16 values, falls within the shadow midtones, and 8 tonal values fall into the shadows. And so it's very important that when you photograph a scene, that you want to give it ample exposure so that you are shifting that histogram. So this is how it looked as I captured it. Here's the histogram as I captured this image. You can see that the image behind the histogram is considerably lighter overall, and you can see that that histogram is shifted to the right. And I did that so that when I processed it back down into the tonal values where I want them for the final image, I'm not borrowing information, I'm not borrowing pixels from the shadows to bring them up into the midtones of the highlights. Rather, I'm taking pixels that are here in the midtones and the highlights, and I am forcing them back down into the shadow areas where I have fewer tonal values. I can't change the number of tonal values I have. That's fixed. It's never going to change. But what I can do is I can make more, I can take pixels from an area that doesn't need as many pixels and push them into areas that do need more pixels to help define that area better. And that's the cornerstone of why I shoot with RAW and why I expose to the right, so that I can do that. And that's the optimum for the image. I don't always hit it. I mean, there's plenty of images that I do that are underexposed, and I wish I wouldn't have exposed them at that I would have given them more. But consistently, this is what I strive for with my work, is to give it plenty of exposure and then process them back down in. I don't want to overexpose, which I certainly haven't. I didn't lose any information in the highlights because I had overexposed. I have all the information there that I need. All right, I've got a question here. Somebody's asking me if I have done black and white infrared, and no, I have not. I have not played around with it. I keep saying I'm going to convert a camera to infrared and play around with it, but I've never gotten around to it. So One of the things that I do when I'm doing my post-processing is I add a grain effect. And in both Lightroom as well as Camera Raw, you have this dialog box under the effects. And it will allow you to, add a vignette or change it around, as you can see here, but also in the bottom part, you can add grain, okay? Grain is different than noise. Noise is static and it's uniform. And it's a digital artifact. Grain is the effect of grain that is here is organic. It dates back to film. When you had faster speed films, you had to have the granule that reacted to light had to be larger in order to collect enough light quickly enough. So that's why the faster speed films had larger granules or grain. And it's a random thing. It's totally random. It's not uniform. So that's the big difference between noise and grain. Noise is uniform, grain is not. It's more organic. And so they have replicated that look with a special effects filter that applies a random graininess to the image. And you control that by sliding these sliders of amount, size, and roughness. And I have included some examples for you to take a look at. I've used this image as my standard. And so I'm looking at just a portion of it. And here I have set the amount to 30, the size to 20, and those two add up to 50, which is roughness, which is the default setting. So I find that if you just want to add just a hint, you can see there's a hint of some graininess in there. And the 30, 20, and leaving the 50 alone gives me just sort of a hint of a fine-grained black and white film. Something like Plus X or maybe even Panatomic X, a very fine-grained black and white film. If I want something that has a more rough look to it, that gives me the look of maybe a Tri-X or even a Tri-X pushed, or what was called a high-speed recording film that also had a lot of grain. Now I'm kicking that amount up to 60. I'm increasing the size to 40, and I've turned my roughness up to 60. So these are the settings that I've kind of played around with. You might want to do your own. If you're in, and it depends on what you're going out to as far as the output device. If you're going out to an inkjet printer, it's going to look different than if you're doing an actual photographic laser print. A photographic laser print is going to be sharper. It's going to enhance the look of the grain more. If you're going out to an inkjet printer, that has a tendency to smooth things out, and so the grain doesn't become as apparent. In my post-processing, I use Camera Raw, which is a part of the Adobe Bridge and Photoshop. If you use Lightroom, you're going to have the same basic things, but you'll handle them just a little bit differently. The curtains look a little different, but the basic room structure is the same. And you'll see this is a real typical image that I have done, and most of my adjustments are done right here in the basic sliders. In this case, I brought the exposure down just a little bit. I added a significant amount of contrast, and then I took my highlights and shadow sliders and zipped them in total opposite direction of each other. I wanted to open up the shadows. I wanted to darken down the highlights. By darkening down the highlights, I brought the values down in the sky up here. Again, that deeper sky. By opening up the shadows, I opened up this area and these areas for more information and better delineation. And I gave it a significant amount of blacks. I'm writing those blacks down. And then this was actually with an older process than what we've got right now, because we have the texture setting, which I find I use the texture more than clarity now, and then a little bit of dehaze. One of the biggest problems most beginners have in post-process is they confuse contrast, which is this second slider down right here below the color balance. The second slider down, they confuse contrast with dynamic range. Dynamic range is set by the highlight and the shadow slider. Contrast has to do with the overall contrast of the image. Most images, in particular black and white images, like a boost of contrast. A lot of people fall into a trap where they're trying to fix a situation where they have a really wide dynamic range of the image by lowering the contrast. You don't want to lower the contrast. This image had a really high dynamic range. There was, the highlights were blown out and the shadows were getting dark, and I needed to open up shadows and darken down highlights. That's different than contrast. I increased the contrast. I took care of dynamic range using highlight and shadows. And then also, once I'm done with this and I go into Photoshop, when I open it into Photoshop, I'm doing further work in Photoshop where I am altering it by burning and dodging. And I do that, as you see over here. I have the history palette open, and you can see I have a number of history brush selections that are there. Though anybody that's taken a printmaking workshop knows that I really favor the use of the history brush for burning and dodging. If you're not familiar with the history brush, you can go to coldsnapphotography.com, my website, and there is a step-by-step tutorial in the blog area on how to do the history brush and why I use it. So that's how I burn and dodge. Now we're getting close to the end here. We're getting to the print portion and how I handle printing. And how I handle printing is a little bit different than most, certainly different than I do my color, and probably different than most people are familiar with. I discovered this little trick in using these printers. I do a lot of printing, and I print a ton of images, and I discovered that this is just showing the print management for the Epson printers. I'm actually going to click one more and get into this is the Canon Print Studio Pro. I love this interface for printing. It is worth the cost of the printer over the Epson. I love the Canon print interface much better than the Epson one, because everything's on one page. It's all laid out. You can put multiple images, queue multiple images up, print them out. It works really slick. So if you notice here, what I'm going to print out on is, if you look at, I'm color profiling. And even though it's black and white, you have to apply a color profile. It's a color profile. It's actually a black and white. So the printer profile that I'm applying, I use Moab paper, and I'm using the Juniper Burrata paper for the Pro 1000 Canon printer. Right down here in the lower right of the dialog box, you see that. That paper is a luster paper. It is designed to be used with the photo black setting on the printer. But if you look at the top right portion of the print driver, you will see I've got it set to print on the Canon Pro 1000 printer, but my media type is matte photo paper. So what I have told the printer is that I'm using matte black, not photo black, but matte black. And what I have discovered is that when I use the matte black setting, but profile it as a normal profile with the correct profile for the paper, it uses the matte black when it lays down the ink, which gives it a deep, dark black. And the traditional reason that we don't want to do that is that what we were told was, oh, you can't use the matte black on luster papers or glossy papers because it doesn't set up and dry and it will rub off. And that's true. So you have to handle these prints just a little bit differently. You have to be a little bit more careful. It's true to a certain degree. It will harden up, and it will harden up, but you need to treat them a little more gingerly for the first couple days and just let that black ink set up a little bit more. But once it's set, and I've done rub tests where I've really gone after the print. I let it sit for a couple days and then take my thumb and just rub. And yeah, I might come off with a little bit of smudge of black on my thumb, but you know, if I do that on a photo ink paper one too, I get the same thing. So just maybe not to quite the degree, because there's a thicker ink on there, so it would make sense that it would. But how many times are you going to sit there and take your thumb and rub on a print trying to get that ink off. Not too many times. So it's something you need to be aware of, but it's not of concern. So here is my review, overview of my workflow. I do the camera capture, I expose for shadows, I'm capturing in raw format. I import to Bridge, Lightroom, doesn't really matter. I'm gonna process for the highlights, bringing it down, and then of course I'm working the shadows as well. I add the grain effect, I export to Photoshop. I do that in ProPhoto RGB color space, which is odd because it's a full color space, but I'm just using black and white. But then I go in and I massage the image by burning and dodging and other fine retouching. I print from Photoshop with a color profile set. If I want to add a tonality to the image, a little bit of a brown tone, or what I like is actually just a hint of kind of a purplish brown look, like the old selenium toner, I will do that in Photoshop, and I just go into the curves and add a little bit of magenta, just a touch of magenta and a touch of yellow, and it makes it sort of a purplish brown. If you're interested in fine art prints, you can go to John Gregor Photography. That's where I market my prints. And if you're interested in workshops and tutorials, you can go to Cold Snap Photography. I see that we have a couple more questions, and I will answer them. Certainly, if you have any other questions, now's the time to type them in. Let's see, it's Steve Serena is asking, do I have any tips to prevent loss of information in the highlights when exposing to the right? Yeah, my tip would be that you don't blow out the highlights. You want to run it right up to the highlight, Steve. Run it right up to the point where you're going to blow it out and stop your exposure there. And there are times when the scene is so contrasty that your shadows are still plenty dark, but you're trying to get it to the right as far as you can without overexposing. I turn my blinkies on and I watch for those blinkies. Now I know that I can recover at least 2/3 of a stop or more in the highlight areas when I bring it into the raw processor. So if I see little tiny bits of blinkies, I'm not too concerned. If those blinkies start to expand and grow and occupy too much of that region, depending on what it is, cloudy sky or snow-covered area or something, then I'm more concerned. But if I've got a little bit of blinkies working their way in, I know I can process that back down, and I'm not as concerned here. Admin, which is Scott, what software do I use to convert images to black and white? I'm using, I use Bridge as a browser with Camera Raw, which is Adobe Camera Raw. Lightroom has virtually the same tools that the Camera Raw has. John asks, do you convert your various raw files to DNG or some other generic format? When you import them, are you worried about file formats not being supported down the road? No, I'm not. I'm not worried that file formats are not supported down the road. I keep them in the native format because they have the best nuance. DNG is something that Adobe came up with that said, you know, well, what if Canon goes out of business, or what if Olympus goes out of business? Gosh, well, look, Olympus is maybe going out of business. We're not sure, but you know, yeah. Well, what if Adobe goes out of business? Anybody can go out of business. That's certainly true. We've seen that in this market, that anybody could go out of business. I don't buy into the DNG because here's why. Even if you go way, way, way back, if you're really into something, you can find the software you need to make the conversions. Plus, where they may not upgrade them, if you have a Minolta file from years ago, the conversion files are still built into those converters. Is still going to convert it. You know, I'm not worried about it. And if it gets so bad, you usually are going to see it coming, and you just do a DNG conversion at that point, and you can get it. But in the meantime, why convert it? You're throwing away the nuances that the manufacturer, the proprietary nuances that they put into it. So it's defeating the purpose of having a raw format, as far as I see. Bruce asks, why 8-bit instead of 16-bit for your black and white? it's not a why question. It is, and that is, I maintain 16-bit color all the way through the life of the image. But when I send it to the printer's only capable of reproducing 6 or 8-bit. It cannot, it doesn't have 16 bits of tonal values there. They may claim that you can send a 16-bit to the printer. They'll say, do you want to send the full 16-bit? Well, yeah, of course I want to send the full 16-bit to it. But they're not reproducing 16 bits of color. They have roughly 256 tonal values. That's it. It's not a matter of a choice. It is. That's what you have. So that's what you have to live with. So I'm doing everything I can to maximize that 16-bit that I have, that I'm living with, all the way up into the point where I'm sending it to the printer, to maximize that information as much as I can, knowing that the printer is going to dumb it down to essentially what is an 8-bit color format. Eric asks, do you do your own ICC profiles or download from Moab? I have done my own ICC profiles and haven't seen a significant reason to do it. I had, what was it? It was one of the color Spider 5, I forget the overall name of the company. This is shame on me, but they sent me a complete setup so that I could do my own profiles, and I tried it and I didn't see a distinct advantage. It was a tremendous amount of work, and the ones that I got from the paper manufacturers worked every bit as good and were a whole lot easier to deal with. I did struggle with some profiles for an older printer and some papers, which I sent out to a service bureau and had a ICC profile built, and that worked really well, but that was a number of years ago. Now I find that I can get what I need just online. Steve asks, is there a significant difference between sRGB and ProPhoto when doing black and white? Not a significant difference, but there is a subtle difference. I like to maintain as much information as possible up until the final point where the printer is making the conversion. So it's my belief that you throw as much information as possible at that printer, because they're designed to take that information and then sort of shoehorn it into the smaller color space that they're dealing with. So rather than have the same amount of information go all the way through, I'm taking more information and funneling it in. And my belief is that you get a better image, a higher integrity image. And I've run tests on this and saw the differences. It's subtle, but we're dealing in subtleties when we're dealing in fine art prints. So there's subtle differences that make it better. Scott says, again, he's admin, in the film days, did you start with black and white or color? I started with black and white. I shot many, many, many rolls of black and white before I even tried color. Color was more expensive. I was a poor kid and I couldn't afford much. And so, I mean, every once in a while I would splurge and buy a roll of Kodachrome, and boy, that was something. I got to shoot a roll or two of Kodachrome and got it back and look at it. Wow. I remember once when I was a little older and I had more money and I went on a big trip, and I was coming back on a train in Canada, and I had shot about a dozen rolls of color slide film, and I was reorganizing it in my bag on the train, and there was a father and son sitting in this chair opposite me, and you should have seen the look on their face as I started pulling out can after can of this exposed color slide film, and their eyes just got really big. They thought that was something, and it was for me even. So yeah, I started out with black and white, and that was what I shot for a long, long time before I started shooting color. Steve Thompson, have you used Lightroom to convert black and white and then go to the HSL or black and white panel to adjust red, orange, blue, green channels, etc., to adjust contrast? I'm sure there might be some of my students out there that are chuckling right now, because I tell them that I will slap their hands if they try to use the HSL panel and make adjustments. I don't like that panel. It is, the algorithm for it, I think, is rather coarse, and you can easily see artifacts if you adjust too far. And you may not see them on the screen, but when you start making prints, you get these weird artifacts or separations because it's creating a mask between the color values that are there, whether you're using the red or the orange or the green or the blue or whatever, and there's an edge. And a lot of times you'll make that adjustment too far, and then that edge, which you may not even notice on the screen, but you make a print, bam, there it is. And I'll look at it and I'll say, you've been messing with the HSL again, haven't you? Yeah, I told you to keep your hands off of that. I don't like it. I stay away from it. There's other better ways to handle it, primarily by doing burning and dodging with the history brush. I find I can do most of the stuff there, and it's as you get good with it, it's better. I'm sure if you got really good with the HSL, you could pull it off, no problem. But I just find that I can do a whole lot more with the method that I use, which is the history brush, and it works better. Mark Franks asks, so generically 16-bit for screen presentation and 8-bit for printing. Maintain 16-bit all the way through. It will convert itself at the very end. I don't convert it from 16-bit to 8-bit for the printing. The printer converts it. So I'm feeding that printer 16-bit, but it is going through a transformation. And that transformation is into essentially 8-bit color. So I maintain 16-bit with my images all the way through. I do not convert them. It is a conversion that's made. So that is the presentation. And
John?
I think we've got all our questions. Yeah.
There's a couple of questions over in the answer that I said that I wrote these down. The 18 to 55 284 versus the 16 to 55 28. How do they compare?
The 16 to 55 2.8 is a superb lens. They're both really good lenses. For a kit lens, that lens, if you start talking about comparisons, you talk about a kit lens, it'll blow the doors off of any kit lens out there by any other manufacturer. But the 1655 will blow the doors off of any top end lens, L glass, or I forget what's the Nikon designation of their top glass. I'll put it up against any one of them. It's superb. You are dancing with the big boys and you're paying 2/3 the cost.
And the 16 to 55 is a 2.8 all the way through.
That's correct.
And the other one's a 2.8 to 4.
The other one is I think it's 4.
I don't remember.
Yep, I've got it right here.
2.8 to 4.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep, 2.8 to 4.
And then another question, the Hubert Cole said he had his XT2 converted to IR and wants to know about using the 750 filter. Have you done any of that?
I haven't worked with infrared. I'm afraid, I've got an XT2 sitting right here with that kit lens, and I think that I should send that in and get it converted to IR and start playing around with it. I mean, it's intrigued me, but I've never followed through, and I've got an extra camera because I've got 2 XT3s and now I got this XT2 sitting here, and so that's a good use for it.
Roberta Roth want to know if you use Silver AFX Pro.
I do not. I find that the Adobe products tend to work just fine for me. When you get into some of those secondary things where they're running them through different profiles, they're making substantive changes to the image quality and the way things are put together, and adding stuff like pre-programmed masks and things, and you can get artifacts in there when you start printing them and you don't know where they came from and you don't know how to fix them. So I am a very traditional guy. I stick with Adobe and that's it. Because I know if I made a change, I know where it is and I know where I can, if it's not working, I know why I can fix it because I did this. There it is.
I have one other point I wanted to make on the SD cards. I had a couple of corrupt cards and I tried downloading them. Wouldn't work. I went online. I asked a lot of questions. And I got a guy all the way from Scotland told me import them as DNG, and I did, and I saved about 95% of the images. Somehow
Yeah.
DNG overlooked some of those issues that were in the native format. So
I can see that. I think that I've only used the recovery software a couple times on cards that were corrupt, and it seems to me that they did end up in a DNG format. But as a normal course of working, I prefer to keep the original raw file.
okay. I think that's the last question I had.
Okay. Well, I want to thank everybody for attending. I hope you enjoyed the presentation, and Jim and I will be announcing when we're coming out with the next in this series, which will go into more into fine art, and in particular fine art printing and presentation.
And we're going to do that. I'll be making the announcement on Great Plains Nature Photographers Facebook page, and I try to share that with other groups who I know may not come to our page all the time. So I'll try and make sure that everybody gets a chance to see, or gets the opportunity to register for this next presentation when we do it. It won't be very long.
And I'll announce it to my group as well too. And I want to just toss out there, if you're one of my followers, you need to thank Jim and Alan for sponsoring this little series that we're putting on and making it possible.
Very good.
Thanks a lot, guys. Everybody stay safe and have a wonderful time.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.